to start because there was something that was on your social media that I absolutely loved that I wanted to. You said you were giving tips on how to gain confidence and how to get out there. And one of the things that you mentioned is you said go to a bar by yourself. What do you mean
hmm
by that, Danny?
You know, my emphasis on doing things by yourself has a lot to do with building self-confidence and building that sense of belief in yourself. Because
Yes.
I think a lot of times the things that we do, we rely on external validation. We rely on the confirmation that what we're doing is correct from other people. And so, in my experience with traveling and, trying different things out and trying to, develop that belief in myself, I found that that one activity was one that was so far out of my comfort zone that it really did allow me to hit all those angles. Like it developed a sense of confidence by being able to just go to a place that's very social. There's a lot of activity and noise around, and to kind of sit with that by yourself,
Mm,
and then also pushing you to have conversations with people that you normally wouldn't. Like, if you go to a bar with a few friends, you might just rely on that group. That's your pod for the night,
mm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. It's always a good time to go out and hang out with friends and enjoy each other's company. But I found that being by yourself, in limited doses can make you go and talk to random people, can make you strike new conversations up, and really give you that boost of confidence, I guess, that you are all you really need.
I guess a lot of people would think because whenever I spend a lot of time speaking to young people. I go in my full-time job. One of my full-time jobs, I go to schools, colleges, universities, and talk to them about mental health and talk to them about confidence, about empathy, about kindness, all of this sort of stuff. And pretty much one of the universal things, and I go sometimes to private school, international schools, grammar schools, and one of the things that comes up a lot particularly with boys, is they say, I really want to travel. I really want to meet new people, but I feel as though I'm going to get rejected. I have social anxiety. I have ADHD. So when you say that, Danny, what's coming up for me and I'm wondering is how does somebody who is 25, who is 30 get over that barrier to walking into a bar by themselves. Because the thing that I'm thinking as you were saying that is, oh my God, what am I going to wear? What do I do when I arrive there? What are people going to think? Like they're going to think I'm a weirdo just sat there by myself. So how does somebody deal with that then? I guess I'll bring it to you. How do you deal with that when you've done it? And
Mhm.
and speak to the skeptics who would say, yeah, but Danny, you're a good looking guy. You've obviously got confidence. You don't have social anxiety. So you don't have that problem.
These are great points, man. And it's really good to question those things because a lot of times what might seem really easy to us, given our characteristics or some things that are natural to us, might be completely foreign to other people. So I really appreciate that question. Um, you know, it comes over time. I think back in the day, I was really more of an introvert. I was a lot more inward thinking in my own head and not able to kind of cut loose and express myself in that way. And I didn't have that confidence. And so, it really just takes repetition and kind of sitting with that discomfort. Like if you feel that moment where you're like, oh man, my social anxiety is taking hold of me and I feel really just out of place.
Mm,
Um, Leaning into that, I would say when you feel that kind of pushback from something that maybe isn't comfortable to you or something that doesn't come naturally, that's a good sign. That is a sign that you are in kind of the right position. You're doing the right things if you're feeling that little bit of tension, and it's a sign that you're getting out of your comfort zone. And so I would encourage anybody that is thinking that maybe they have certain things that are holding them back, whether it's their natural personality or they're very introverted. It's just like anything else, it just takes repetition and it's like a muscle that you can flex. Your social muscle is something that we don't really use, well, we use every day, but we don't put enough focus on it. We don't put enough focus on it like we would going to the gym
mm,
or like we would reading, where it's very easy to track those things like, okay, I'm in the gym and I'm working on this amount of weight and I'm going up in this is a number you can assign to it. But the social things, the social dynamics are a little harder to pin down. So it really, if you put it in that frame of mind, as in just going out and getting your repetitions in, and going to a bar or an event by yourself, or it doesn't even have to be that extreme. You know, the bar is a kind of an extreme example of what I used for boosting that confidence, that self-confidence. But another thing you can do is just talk to your Uber driver, talk to your barista at the cafe, have a
Mm,
small conversation with somebody random. And in that way, you're not like fully, like if you're at the bar by yourself and you want to talk to somebody random, you're kind of you're opening up a conversation. You're opening up an extended interaction, right?
yeah.
But if you're just having that conversation, quick chat with the barista at the cafe, it's no pressure, you know, and it's a kind of a stepping stone, I guess, if you want to use that as a way to graduate to the more like advanced kind of social dynamic.
So a confidence builder in a sense, really. So a
Oh, I
confidence builder, you was
think I lost you there for a second.
no, that's okay.
Uh,
So it would be a bit of a confidence builder in a sense, a stepping
in
stone.
and out.
So I was just saying that it would be a bit like a confidence builder, a stepping stone to getting that confidence up. Did you hear me then?
Yes, I've got you now. Sorry about that. I think my connection might be a little spotty, so
No, that's all right.
apologies.
So I was just saying that. So that would be a bit like a confidence builder, so a stepping stone to eventually having that strong self-esteem. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. You got to work up to it, I
Because
think.
yeah,
Yeah,
because a lot
go
of
ahead.
people would say like, yeah, but come on, Danny, like me speaking to my Uber driver, going to Costa Coffee, going to Starbucks and speaking to the barista, that's not really the connection and the intimacy that I'm looking for with somebody.
Mhm.
Um, and realistically, come on, how is that gonna form a long-lasting friendship? And how many of those do I have to do in order to establish that friend and get these friends? Because so many people will say, look, Danny, I can speak to a barista, but that still doesn't get me what I want, which is that group, that circle of men who I can listen to, who get me, or that person who understands me, who I can do things with. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, that it's true. I guess the stepping stones, speaking with the barista and speaking with maybe random strangers that you run into intermittently. The goal there isn't really to make those connections. If they do come about, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I've had some cool interactions with baristas and my servers at restaurants and stuff like that over the years, but the idea is to just gradually move towards being able to open up that deeper connection that you're seeking. So those connections generally aren't going to happen unless you're in a good conversational flow and you feel
Mm.
comfortable talking to people, getting to know people, asking them questions. And so it's really just about getting you to that position to where you feel comfortable doing those things. And then you can start taking on those bigger challenges, I guess, of putting yourself in positions by yourself, or being open to those deeper interactions.
I think it
And
speaks.
yeah,
No, carry on. Sorry.
and I was just gonna leave you with one last, I guess, recommendation for somebody who was skeptical about that um is to try and find people fascinating. I mean, everybody is fascinating, right? Like, no matter what,
Mm,
everybody has a really unique journey and a unique story to tell. And
mm.
if you develop that sort of curiosity about people, you're going to make these deeper connections so much easier, because you're automatically going to be like, man, what is your backstory? Where are you coming from? What are you doing here? Like, there's so many ways and angles that you can approach a conversation, compared to it just being like in a box, like where it dead ends. We've all had those dead end conversations. You ask somebody, yo, what's your name? What do you do? And then it's like, all right, we're done. And you can't take it deeper. So,
No, it
um,
is true.
yeah.
I always say to people, particularly younger people who I meet, that the way through is don't ask people facts, ask people about their story. Everyone
Mm,
has a story, right? And
yep.
the reality is most people are gonna be weary because they're like, why are you asking me about my story? I don't really know you. But just notice stuff about somebody. So, for example, earlier when I was obviously, I noticed Danny's. For those of you who are listening to this online, Danny's wearing a Brazil football jersey. Or t-shirt, and I was saying to him like, how come you're wearing that? And that, people don't just wear stuff randomly. Obviously, there's a story behind that Danny was sharing with me earlier on before we came online. But just finding out people's stories, everyone has a story, and just notice things about them and just pay attention to them. It might be a tattoo or something like that, and just go from there. But I think what it also does speak to is something that you've talked a lot about, because I've watched a number of your videos, and you've talked a lot about self-improvement, and that mindset of self-mastery. And in fact, on your Instagram, I believe it says self improvement, helping people with self improvement, mindset mastery of self, and overall wellness. I wondered, why did you put that, and why did you decide that was something which is important for people, men or people in general, to explore?
Man, I think your relationship with self is the biggest factor towards your overall happiness and success in life. I mean, if you look inwards and you work on developing qualities and becoming a better person each and every day, just a small kind of micro step in the right direction, it just ripples throughout the rest of your life. It's going to ripple throughout your relationships with other people, in your work. If you have a healthier relationship with self, you're not going to be as emotional or as reactive when people are saying certain things. If you have just a better control of your own mind, I feel like the whole world kind of opens up to you. And these were things that I was working on in my own life for many, many years before I started to do the podcast and before I started to like really hone in on those specific things. I was trying the whole gamut of different actions. I was doing a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about on the podcast just in real life and working on it. And I found that, yeah, that inward focus is really a powerful way to not only improve your own life, but improve the lives of everybody that your life touches.
Mm,
Um, because a lot of people I think talk about self improvement and personal development as kind of selfish. I've heard this criticism sometimes where people will say that all you're doing is working on yourself, all you're doing is caring about yourself, so
mm.
you're kind of you don't care about whatever else is happening in the world. But my counter to that is that by being a better version of yourself and carrying that forward through all of your interactions in the day, it actually has a positive ripple effect through every life that you touch. So you're by bettering yourself, you're bettering the world, and that's kind of how I look at it.
I love that. I absolutely love that, and I did hear you talk about that. In fact, it talks to something that I also saw you talk about, which was, and if you go on your social media, it's the first thing that you put on your social media, which is, no, I'm not qualified to give advice, which is very interesting.
Mhm.
And no, you say that no one is qualified to give you advice about your life. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so that was one of the first videos I made when I started to get into the podcasting and started
Yeah.
to kind of adopt this role of, yeah, advice giver, mentor, whatever you want to call it. And the way I look at it is that everybody is figuring themselves out. And I noticed this as I got older, people that you would look up to that you thought had everything dialed in, like they were
Mm,
completely perfect individuals. You realize there's so many flaws, there's so many things that are going wrong in their life, and they're still on their toes trying to adapt, trying to figure things out. And so, while some people may on paper look like they have a lot more figured out, whether it is the number in their bank account or, the number of businesses they own or different things like that, they're still on their toes just like all of us are. They're still trying to adapt and they're still trying to figure life out as it comes at them. And I think you just have to really take the leap and try different things out, or otherwise you're not going to be in the position to even learn from those experiences. So that's kind of the gist of it. Even though some people might have different qualities or they might have different ways of teaching, I feel like we all have something to teach each other and we all have something to learn from each other. So I figured, why not try and share some of my own experiences in the hopes that it would help other people. And the other thing I do say in that video is that some people are looking at somebody who has, the five Porsches out front of the mansion, and they're looking up to them like, man, they're so
Yeah.
far away. Like the gap between me and them right now is enormous. Versus like what I'm trying to portray is like, okay, I'm also just kind of a average dude. I'm working on myself. I'm trying to become better, but
Mm.
I'm closer to the most of the people that I'm trying to reach. And there's not this big gulf in between me and them. And so I wanted to kind of fill that gap, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, it is true though, because I think as you get more and more and more successful, I think there's a say you forget what it was like to be on that level. I think there's a
Hmm.
saying that they say in academia that one of the hardest places to be is to get a PhD, because by the time you've got a PhD, you're somewhat 8, 9, 10 years into studying your subject. Now, and the true test of how good you are and how intelligent you are is and it talks to something which you were talking about, which is leadership actually. And it talks to, can you now take this very complex level that you've managed to master your area or your area of competence, and now go and teach it to somebody who is at the very beginning of their journey? Can you simplify it? Are you able to extract the principles, and are you able to extract the lessons and the basics and the fundamentals, and help somebody rise from that level moving forward? And I think that
Hmm.
that leadership, as you were alluding to in one of your videos, I think is so important.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being able to teach a subject and break it down to the basics, that's true brilliance. Like brilliance is not being able to explain the most complex subject in a way that confuses people and is only understandable to you. I think it's truly brilliant when you're able to say, okay, this is this long journey or complex um process that I went through, and here's how you simplify it and break it down into concrete steps that people can use. And
Mm.
yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. That's so important. In terms of like spreading the knowledge throughout the world is how it's coming across. Like, are you kind of preaching these principles in a way that doesn't really hit home to people because it's not simplified enough, or are you coming from a place of being kind of condescending? Like that's really like I'm trying so hard in a lot of what I do in the content that I put together, to not talk down at all. I want it to be peer to peer. I want it to be face to face. I don't want people to think that just because, using the bar example, like just because I'm able to go there and be comfortable in a bar by myself, that makes me in any way better than anybody else. It's just a process that we're all working on. And I think that's so important as not only as a part of leadership, but also part of teaching, like you were saying.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you for that. Um, One of the things that I was really fascinated with your story is, and I wonder, you obviously you don't have to talk about this, but there is, I guess, people who are going to be listening to this, the thing that they're going to be thinking is the same thing that I was thinking is, where are you getting all this drive from? Danny, I cannot tell you the amount of people who ask me about motivation, who ask me about inspiration. In fact, in one of your videos, when you were thinking about ideas to do on the podcast, you took a walk, which was one of the strategies that you said, go for a walk and all
Mhm.
kinds of ideas can appear to you. But there's a lot of people who are like, look, Danny, I'm 27. I've been working in a shopping place. I'm all right. I'm not poor. I have a nice family, but I haven't figured out my thing yet. And to be honest with you, yes, I understand I should go to the gym, and gym helps me and look after myself, and I should read books and get a mentor, but I just don't have the motivation. So I guess
Mhm.
to you, where would did you find your motivation? How are you cooking at such a high level? What's keeping you going?
Yeah, the drive is a hard thing to pin down. Some people operate at a certain frequency that's different than others. And I think people just need to keep experimenting with things that fascinate them, things that excite them,
Mm,
rather than trying to just keep searching for this true calling, this kind of like destiny, if you will.
right.
My very first podcast episode was called The Myth of Your True Calling. And I talk about how you can find purpose and value in virtually anything. as opposed to it being like this purpose in life, this kind of ethereal destiny kind of that you're pursuing. You can really turn most ordinary things into you create a story about them that emphasizes that this is part of my purpose.
Right.
So, on that episode, I'm talking about like somebody who might be a barista at a coffee shop, or someone who feels like they're doing work that is beneath them or is not fulfilling to them. You
Which
can
is a
kind
lot
of
of people. Which is a lot of people.
Yes, yes, definitely. You can spin that in your mind if you really think about it. If you really take time to think about what that is and how it fits into your life story, you can give that a spin that is emphasizing that it's part of your life journey, and it's just a step along the way towards something greater.
Mm,
And I found this when I first started my very first job out of college. I was working, very entry level position, and it always felt like I was on the path towards something better, and it was a part that I was working on. It wasn't something that I just felt innately. It was like every day I had to continually like emphasize this. Okay, we're
mm.
getting up, we're back on the grind, but this is getting me to where I need to go. This is just one step towards the ultimate destination. And you can look at almost any job in that way, or any profession, any business that you're working on that might not feel like it's really deeply fulfilling to you. It's giving you experience, it's giving you knowledge, it's allowing you to hone your craft in one way or another,
Mm.
and that's kind of taking you closer to your end goal. So I guess it's been a process. And it's hard to do, but it just requires, that concentration on the bigger picture, that it's all part of your life experience, and you're moving slowly towards your end goal with each day.
So I guess the question that I would somebody would ask you then, Danny, is how did you know what that thing was for you, which allowed you to be able to have peace with the fact that you're not yet a success, but you're working towards that?
Mhm.
How did you figure that out?
Mm.
Did you
Yeah, like how do
know?
you
Did you?
find your
Yeah.
your purpose?
How do you find your purpose? How do you know what you want to be doing in by the time you reach 35? How did you find that for you? Or is that still a process that
Mhm.
is that is still evolving?
It is still evolving for me in a lot of ways. Um, and one thing I will quote one of my favorite authors, Robert Greene. He talks about
Yes.
this in his book,
Love Robert
Mastery.
Greene.
Have you read Robert Greene?
Of course I have.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I
Okay,
love him,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, so he talks about looking back towards when you're a child, looking back towards things that you enjoyed as when you were growing up, and things that really felt like freedom, when you're doing them, and you're free to express yourself. You're really in tune with your body, with your mind, and focusing on those specific actions, like when you were a kid and you were dreaming of doing something, what really gave you that greatest level of excitement. And those are kind of the innate passions that you have. And some of these, of course, can appear throughout the course of your life. It doesn't have to be something that you were fixated on when you were 4 years old. But as you move through your life, some of these things will ignite that burning desire, that drive within you.
Mm.
And a lot of times we ignore them because we don't really see them as a viable career option. Sometimes, like for me, I'm passionate about soccer, and I've always loved soccer. I played soccer my entire life. And
That's
so,
football. For those of you who are
yeah,
listening from Europe, that's
yes.
football.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Sorry, I should have done the translation, um but that passion, in another life maybe I could have converted that to something more viable, because that was always something that really got me going, that I didn't have to drink coffee for. I could do it on 4 hours of sleep. I could wake up and I would be excited and into it and very passionate about it. And so it's those little things. And so for me, I guess to answer your question about my early career journey and how I knew that it was like I was kind of on the right path, it had to do a lot with those same qualities that I experienced as a kid, those same feelings when I was younger. So what I do now is I do like technical writing and research and some project management stuff for my day job, and I always loved writing. That was another thing. I always loved creative writing. I was writing these
Mm.
books like at home. I was trying to write a book when I was like 10 years old. It was like this action adventure novel. It was heavily influenced probably by Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I was just really into writing, and that excited me in ways that many things didn't. And
Mm,
so as I started to get into my career, I think I got pretty lucky, honestly, that I found something early on that matched those skill sets to a job, to a profession.
mm,
But that's the other piece of it too, is like Robert Greene was saying, to look inwards, what you were excited about as a kid, what got you passionate, and then also looking at what you're good at. Like, what have you become really good at over the years, and how can you convert that into something that fulfills you, and ideally mixing the two. But it really takes a lot of like looking inward and seeing like, okay, what skills do I have that I can potentially apply on a day-to-day basis? Because sometimes we might be doing things that are, they're paying the bills and we're okay at them, but they're not like our natural skill set. You know,
mm.
like some people might be naturally good at talking to people, but then they end up in the tech field and they're like head down doing coding. And it's like, well, you're not going to get the opportunity to flex that skill set anymore. So I think it's those two things. It's like looking back in your life, seeing what got you passionate, and then also looking like at the skills that you developed over time and seeing how you can blend it all.
So there's two things. If I was listening to you right now and I was in this situation, there's two things that I would bring up. Um, and I wonder if you could touch on both of them. The first thing would be, well, Danny, I like to play PlayStation. And I guess the question is, how do I differentiate between something that is a hobby and something that I can make a career out of? That's the first part of it. The second part of it is, Danny, you don't understand how hard my life has been. I didn't
Mm.
grow up with a father. I haven't got mentorship. I was neglected as a kid. I was in foster care. Um, I've I was bullied, in a lot of my schooling life. I was never academic. I have ADHD. So I have had every single obstacle and put in front of me. And every time that I try to progress and move forward, as you say, and I am trying to get out there and make friends, they haven't been good for me. So I wonder if you could speak to each of those separately, if you would, please, Danny.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So those are two different scenarios, I guess, where one, the first scenario where a person is passionate about something that doesn't seem like it's a career,
Yeah,
and
they
that
love
if
to
that's
play GT.
PlayStation.
Yeah, they love to play GTA, Grand
Hmm.
Theft Auto.
Yeah,
But they're thinking, how the hell am I going to make a living out of that?
right, right. Well, in one avenue, you could potentially, I mean, the gaming industry, if you want to take it very literally, there are avenues for almost any hobby that you really can think of. There are people that are doing it full time and that have made that career. They might be a small percentage of folks that are out there. And it's kind of like similar to somebody who loves football. Like, okay, are you going to really go pro? Probably not unless you're exceptionally talented and you have a unique, skill set and physique that allows you to pursue that. So let's just like write that one off. Like let's say, okay, there's no option to pursue video games as a full-time career. In that case, it goes back to what I really emphasize for people is experimentation, and trying different hobbies out, different activities, talking to different people, running with different
Mm,
social circles. All of these things will kind of congeal into your life experience and will give you new ideas, and new opportunities will be created by that. And I know that's kind of like 30,000 foot view. Like it's hard to like give exact recommendations to people because there's no like blanket recommendation that work for everybody.
mm,
But in reality, like that's how you get ideas. Like what I was talking about on that walk, like going for a walk and just putting yourself out there in the world. You're only going to be able to come up with these new ideas if you're actively living life. Like if you're an active participant in your life rather than kind of accepting that this is your fate, and that, it's going to somehow appear to you. It's not just going to appear to you in a dream. Like you have to go out and create a bunch of experiences and pursue different things, try kickboxing, try jogging, try coding, try different things out that might give you an avenue towards discovering that, and eventually it will come, one way or another if you're really active and trying different things out. So I think that would be the best recommendation for anybody who's kind of in that position where they don't necessarily have a clear pathway with their hobbies towards or their skill set. towards a career. So,
And if I may, because you talked a little bit, and I think there's a part, something that you talked about, which I also think is really important. You talked about in one of your videos about, well, kind of there's one part of it which is attached to this, which is this fuck it and investing in your mindset. Two
mm,
mindset. You talked about two mindset that can really change somebody's life, and you talk about this fuck it mindset and
mhm,
this investing in your future mindset. And I do feel like everything has risk. Okay. No matter what you do, you go to university, you might drop out, you could get a degree and not get a graduation job or whatever it may be. But I do think that investing in yourself as part of experimenting, I think is really interesting because I think it was Steve Jobs who said that when Steve Jobs went to his university, he went to a calligraphy class, I believe it was that he said, and he
mhm,
did not know how in the world calligraphy would be of any utility to him. He basically just was walking along on his campus. He saw a poster saying that they were doing a free class on calligraphy. He went to it. It didn't know, it was nothing to do with his degree, he was studying computing, but that calligraphy class was what led him to go to Japan. And when he was in Japan, learning about calligraphy and how that was made, that's how we ended up um, learning about simplification, keeping everything simple. And of course, he took that principle and applied it to Apple. But that was years later. And I know you said about investing in your future, and I do feel like sometimes you just have to do stuff a bit like what you were saying earlier on, going to the bar. Yes, of course, going to the bar, you may not get something out of it instantly, but it does build something in you because it's like, I've done it and I survived, and
mhm.
that down the road can help. You may not know how, but it does help. So I think that was really interesting when you were talking about that. I don't know if you want to add anything else onto that point.
Absolutely, Ben. There's so much to unpack there. I think that's brilliant. What you were saying about Steve Jobs and not knowing where these experiences are going to actually take part in your life. Um, I was thinking about this recently with something that came up in my day-to-day, my day job, and it gave me an idea for an episode. Like, why do self-improvement? Like, why work on yourself and try to improve yourself? Because I
Mm,
noticed that there was a really tough situation that came up in my work, and I just had a different approach to it that have never had before. Where like previously, I might have folded or I might have like tried to call my boss and say, "Oh, we're screwed. Like I messed up." But before I did that, I had a whole process in place that I think came from a lot of the work that I've been doing on myself, the meditation, the morning walks, and trying to calm the mind before the day starts. And so you don't know exactly when these things are going to come into play, but you also can be damn sure that they're not going to have effect if you don't do them in the first place, right? Like if you're not going out and
yeah.
trying these things out and
Mm.
having these experiences, they're not going to come around in any way. And it's like why not go have the experience in the first place? Because one, it's going to be enjoyable, probably. Like Steve Jobs probably, he just enjoyed the calligraphy class. He didn't necessarily do it to get a output for Apple, but he was enjoying it, and then it eventually tied back into his work. And that's the beauty of it all. And I was reading a book when you're talking about Steve Jobs. I was reading Oppenheimer. I
Great
watched the
book.
Oppenheimer movie, and then I'm reading
Yeah.
the biography now. And this man was very similar in that way. I feel like a lot of these top CEOs are like that. They're very multidimensional. Like they're not just focused strictly on physics or focused strictly on design work for computer, engineering. Like Oppenheimer he loved poetry. He was big on like philosophy. Um, and he was just had all of those kind of different ideas coming from different areas of his life that blended into his work. So
Mm.
yeah, you just have to go out and seek those experiences, and you never know when they'll come in handy, but you can probably be sure they will at some point.
It is true because even just before we came online, I was listening to a writing class by J.K. Rowling. And
Hmm.
J.K. Rowling was talking about how she came up with Harry Potter, and she just said she would just taking just different ideas, things that did not, if you watch Harry Potter, she was talking about how she came up with the names and the goblet, and she came up with the name Hermione and all of these things. And basically, what she had done is every time when she was younger, every time she would hear a word or a name which was unique or different, she'd just write it down. She had no idea why she was writing it down. She just found it really interesting. And then, of course, come later on when she started writing, she had accumulated all of these names, which all of a sudden added to this
Mm.
incredible piece of work that ended up becoming Harry Potter. So I think that's really, really interesting. So going back to the second part that I asked you earlier on, which is, can you speak to the lad who is 19 and he's saying, look, Danny, I hear you, but I'll be honest with you. You sound like you've had no hardships, like you came from a nice family. You are clearly, obviously, mentally strong. I've had a really difficult life, you know? My dad hasn't been around. I've tried to make friends, but it just hasn't worked out. I've got social anxiety, like my life has been really hard, but I want to
Hmm.
succeed and I want to do well, but there is just so many obstacles for me to overcome. How do I find a path through when there are I have such low self-esteem. I don't think I'm good enough. I'm not 6'2". I'm not good looking. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of support. I don't have a lot of resources. I wonder if you could speak to that person.
Such an important question. I've struggled with this a lot because sometimes I feel like the content and stuff that I'm producing might fall on deaf ears, and this might be one of those people that, if they're looking at these recommendations and I'm saying that it sounds easy and it could be easy for them to change their life, and they're saying, well, no, I'm actually completely in a box. I've gone through all these hardships, and it's hard for me to overcome it. It sounds like in those situations, it really takes a mindset shift towards looking at some of these hardships as opportunities rather than
Mm,
them being kind of the defeat or the end all be all, I guess, in that person's life. Looking at some of these tough situations as an opportunity to learn from them and to grow from them, as opposed to kind of throwing in the towel and saying, "Well, this is who I am." And I've mentioned this before. I think just in pieces of content that I've shared, but I am are the two most important words in the English language. I am
mm,
is an acceptance, right? So saying or I have, or this is my history, like basically saying that I am in a disadvantaged position or something like that is really accepting that in a lot of ways. And I know there are external circumstances that do make it difficult for people, and you can't avoid those.
mm,
But if you say I am or I have, like one thing that I have struggled with is memory. And I always thought, oh, I have a bad memory. I'm bad with names, things like that. If you continue to say that, you're reinforcing that limiting belief over and over and over and over again in your mind. And
mm,
so it takes a subtle shift in how you communicate with yourself.
mm,
And people like that, it seems like not only is it focused on the mindset shift, but it also has to do with your self-talk, like your communication with yourself internally. What are you telling yourself? Are you saying that I'm defeated? Are you saying that this is going to be my position forever in life? Like it
mm,
really just takes an acknowledgement that you can change at any given moment in time, and you can work on getting yourself towards a position that has more opportunity, that has more advantages. And it really just takes a consistent practice on working at yourself and developing healthier self-talk. um, so those are kind of the key principles that I would suggest for someone, in those positions. And another thing, one last thing, sorry,
yeah, no, no, okay.
that I
Yeah,
would
this is
say
good.
is
This is very good. Yeah.
study people who have also gone through that, right? Like people who have gone through hardship and overcome it and then found themselves in successful positions later in life. They are the perfect examples to look up to follow, because they've been through that. A lot of times people do come from privileged positions and then they end up even more famous and successful, and it's like, okay, they're not going to relate to that person. But people like David Goggins, and even J.K. Rowling. You were mentioning J.K. Rowling earlier. Like she didn't have her big break until I think it was in her 40s or
Yeah.
50s.
What is, yeah. She
And
had a
so she,
divorce. Like, yeah.
yeah, like she was hitting her head against the wall for many, many years. And those are the people that you can look up to for inspiration, and that's what I've consistently been inspired by is people that are seemingly ordinary and who didn't have anything really genetically or biologically that set them apart, but they had that deep sense of belief, from the beginning, and they just kept developing it over time and over time, and they never let go, and then eventually they found their break.
I wonder if you could talk to how a 19-year-old might be able to start this process of positive self-talk. Okay,
Mm,
I've heard you, Danny. I agree. I have terrible self-talk. I don't believe I'm worthy. I don't believe I'm good enough. I don't think I'm good looking. What does it look like from a practical standpoint on a daily basis? Like, okay, I finished this podcast. I've listened to you. Now, what do I do to start that process?
hmm hmm Yeah, I mean, I talk about the 5 pillars of health a lot. I talk about, working on different areas of your life so you're the most well-rounded that you can be. So working on your mental, your physical, your spiritual, your emotional, and your financial health.
Mhm.
So trying to cover all of those bases. But in reality, your mentality is kind of the most important, like we're talking about, all those other parts will feel kind of lacking unless you have a really strong and devoted mindset towards bettering yourself. And so one tool that someone could use, the 19-year-old that's struggling with this and needs to improve their self-talk, is getting things down on paper. So
Okay.
being really intentional about what they're writing down. I found that I still don't have a scientific backing for this, but when I write things down on paper, it does something. It ingrains it in my mind in a different way versus
Mm,
speaking it out loud. And this might just be how I operate, because I like to write and I enjoy that. Maybe for other people, speaking it out loud in the mirror or speaking it, while they're exercising, different things. But that self talk, one way or another, is incredibly important. And so for me, it's been helpful just to journal and to write um, intentions, like I am, like what I was saying with those words, like I am abundant, or I am bountiful, or I am. It could be anything that you're trying to focus on,
mm.
and just really ingrain that in your mind. Whether that's through writing. For me, it's been writing, but for other people, it could be speaking it out loud. Um, I've always felt like a crazy person when I do that in the mirror, so I try to not do that, but sometimes, when I'm exercising, I have like mantras too that I'll say,
Mm.
and it's really whatever works for you. But I would find the time to really dive into that self-talk, and to explore that through either writing or speaking out loud, and just trying to make that shift.
No, this is such great things that you're sharing because I think a lot of people who I speak to who are struggling, it speaks to something which you talked a little bit about actually, in one of your earlier videos when you were talking about mental health and the importance of mental health, and you shared a little bit about your story. And in fact, I wonder if you could talk too about a little bit about your story and your hospital, what happened to you when going through hospital, and how that affected your mental health, and is what is even mental health and what does that look like? And I know this is a lot of questions, but you can pull whichever one you like. And how does somebody begin to improve that or look at that or examine it?
Mm. Yeah. So I guess my mental health during that time, that specific time period, was the true test. That time period was the true test of all of this work that I was doing to work on my mental health and improve my mental health. That's where the rubber meets the road, when something shitty happens to you, right? Like it's all
Mm,
fun and games working on yourself and reading these books and listen to podcasts until something actually bad does happen to you. And then you realize, okay, I'm down bad right now. Like my life is not good. How do I come out of this hole that I'm in now?
mm,
And that's when it's kind of like you're preparing for those moments with all the work that you're doing with the self-talk. That's a really important part that also ties into your mental health, is your relationship with yourself and how you communicate with yourself. It really will improve your mental health if you have kind of a positive light on all of that communication. um, and so I found that when I went into that experience, it wasn't something that triggered a desire to improve myself because I had been working on these things for many years, and it
mm,
was just the true test of all of that. Um, there's a very a quote that has stuck with me over the years by this philosopher, this Chinese philosopher named Zhuangzi.
Hmm.
And the quote is, it's very simple. It just says, life is capricious. And
Wow.
capricious means
Mm,
unpredictable. It means life is like a curveball. It's always going to throw you curveballs, but it's a fact of life. Life, it is this way. You know, it's
mm,
very unpredictable, and it's always going to hit us with something unexpected. And so when my whole lung collapse happened, when I ended up in the hospital getting lung surgery, and like all of my whole life got put on pause for several months, I had that level of acceptance. Like it wasn't necessarily as bad as it would have been if I didn't have that mindset of like, okay, life is capricious. I've accepted this. Life is unpredictable. It's
mm,
gonna knock you down and hit you while you're down, and it's gonna throw these tests at you. And that sort of frame of mind really helped me to come out of that deep dark pit that I was in, where I felt like everything was off course. You know, I didn't have at the time. I didn't have I had a partner, but I didn't have like somebody that was going to be by my bedside 24/7. And so a lot of that
mm,
was spent by myself in isolation. And, luckily my parents eventually came and were there to spend some time with me too. But, it was eye-opening, man. It was really a reminder that life is short, and, the rug can get pulled out from under you at any moment. And I took away from it too, just the importance of being able to breathe, the blessing of being able to breathe,
I can
because
imagine.
it was a
Yeah.
lung collapse. So like, every breath felt like I was getting stabbed in the chest. So being able to afterwards like breathe pain free was incredible. It was like such a small thing that you take for granted. And once I made it through that whole process, I was like, wow, this is something that I need to emphasize, like doing just really relishing the breath in the morning, and kind of
Mm.
relishing the good health that we have in those moments. So there's so many lessons. I could keep going on about the lessons from that experience, but I guess, and to summarize, it was a true test of mental health, and those tests are going to be the time that you show and prove what you've been learning and working on over the years. And that's really the most important time to practice those things.
And everybody's going to be asking. So just to clarify for people, because I know someone's going to say this to me, why didn't you ask him this? So just run us through what happened and how did you even find out about this? What happened? So you were sat
Mhm.
there one day and then you just start getting these pains, or if you could just walk us through the story of how you even ended up in the hospital in the first place. And guys, if you go on to Danny's uh, Instagram, which is Danny Debrito podcast, you will see all the pictures and everything else on there. So yes, so
Mhm.
if you would mind just sharing the process of how you even discovered all of this.
Yeah, yeah, it was a crazy journey. So it goes all the way back to when I was in ninth grade. I was
Oh
14
wow,
years old.
okay,
Yeah, it's a
right.
long, it's a long journey, but in ninth grade, I woke up one morning, random Wednesday morning, no big deal. I was taking a shower, and I felt like all of a sudden I couldn't get a deep breath. Like I was taking a deep breath at the top of my breath. It felt like I was being stabbed, like in the chest, like literally. And so I came out of the shower. I was like, something's not right. Like this is not good. And I went and I was having breakfast with my parents, and I couldn't eat. I couldn't even breathe without being keeled over. And so we went to the hospital, and they were like, your lung collapsed. Your lung spontaneously collapsed. And so it
Wow.
was it was it was shocking, man. I didn't have any experience with that before. I didn't know what to expect. And basically what they say is that it happens in tall, thin males. So I was like, all right, great. I'm screwed.
Damn, okay.
Yeah, blessing and a curse, I guess, to be tall and thin. But
Yeah.
um,
And how tall are you, Danny?
I'm 6'3".
6'3". There we go. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
so
not
I
for those of you who are listening to this, Danny's not thin. He's an athletic build now.
yeah. So I was in there. They did some scans. They said your lung is 15% collapsed,
Wow.
and we want to take you into surgery right now. And my parents were like, hold on a second. Like surgery seems kind of extreme. Like we've barely been in here a few hours. We just found out about this. We need to think about this. And plus I had my soccer season coming up, so I was like, I can't miss that. And so we
The important
decided
stuff.
to, yeah, yeah, the priorities, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so we decided to pause that and wait for a bit. And you know how the medical system can be a little shady sometimes, where the surgeons are going to be getting paid handsomely for the surgery. So
Of
I didn't know if that
course.
was kind of the same situation here, where it was a recommendation from them to just go forward with it. But we waited on it, and ultimately I went home. I didn't have any issues for 14 years. So that was when I was 14. I didn't have any issues for 14 years. I was running, traveling, swimming, everything was fine.
Yeah.
And when I was 28, last January, woke up, same thing. I was typing an email in the morning, felt like I was getting stabbed in the chest again. And so I went through the whole process, went back to the hospital. They were like, "Yeah, your lung collapsed again." And this time it was worse. It was significantly worse. And
Oh,
we went back and forth. They did some chest tubes in the side, which was supposed to like reinflate the lung, and send me home with these chest tubes like dangling out of my chest. And it was super annoying and painful. But then that didn't work, so it didn't reinflate. We went back, did the scans. It still was collapsed. And so about 2 weeks after the first collapse, where I had been dealing with this issue with these chest tubes and the pain for 2 weeks, they were like, "All right, we're probably going to need to do surgery. Like there's no way we can fully inflate your lung." And we tried our first method, and now the next step is to, do an invasive kind of surgery. And yeah, we ended up just going forward with it. It was crazy because it happened so fast. From the time that I found out that my lung wasn't healed to the time that we did the surgery, it was like a day. Like they were like, "We have an opening in the hospital and we can get you in tomorrow." And so that was where it became real to me. I was like, wow, I actually could go under the knife and be like totally out of it for a couple months.
mm,
And yeah, we decided to do it. I'm thankful that we did it, because what they were saying is that if I didn't do the surgery, it was going to keep collapsing, basically. Like
right.
it wasn't going to heal right then and there. And then also the percentage of it collapsing in the future was like 80%. And then if we did
Oh,
the surgery, it was going to cut that down to like 10 to 15%. So I'm not out of the woods yet completely, but I'm much more secure in terms of like, if it were to collapse, it would be a much better situation. And so yeah, man, that was the whole story, and everything was just recovery after that. Took about 8 weeks, but I got back on my horse eventually.
that is absolutely crazy. The
Hmm.
thing that came up for me as you were saying that is you kept using the word we. Who did you mean by we? We made the decision to
Mm.
take the surgery because earlier on you mentioned that you didn't have a partner.
Hmm.
So are you talking about you and your parents or
Yeah, yeah. My
right?
parents eventually came. They were
Yeah,
like
I'm with you.
4 hours, the 4 hours drive away from where I was living at the time. And
Yeah.
they eventually came up. They came right at the right time, where we were having those kind of tough conversations with the surgeon, and they were breaking down all of the options. And that's when we made the call.
People can go through some crazy things, I tell you. One of the things that I wonder if you could speak to is obviously you live 4 hours away from your parents. There's a lot of people who I meet, and they're like, Kasim, in order for me to realize some of the things that you're talking about, I live in the middle of nowhere. I might have to move to a city, but the city's expensive, but I don't know anybody there. In fact, you talked about it when you were talking about your solo traveling. So how did you have the courage to leave and because you've been traveling, I saw you were in in a farm in the middle of nowhere being very quiet. How did you get develop the courage to just be at peace with being by yourself and be so far away from your nest, from your home?
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, baby steps, baby steps. I
Right.
started first when I went away to college. That was the first time that I'd
Mm.
lived away from home, away from my hometown. And that was the first real experience of being on my own. I think a lot of people do go through with that when they go away to college. And after that, I moved to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area,
Oh,
and I was
expensive.
also
Oof.
very expensive, man. Oh,
That
that
whole
was
California, all of it, that whole strip,
yeah.
expensive.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So that was another test, I guess, of like graduating from, okay, this is all for college and it's all, just studying and there's no real life responsibilities. And then that next step was, I guess, living by myself in the Bay. And then, yeah, I mean, I never really looked back. I think the solo traveling, the first time I solo traveled was also in college. I studied abroad in Spain. And then after the program, I did like 3 weeks kind of traveling around Spain and Portugal. So that was like the first dabbling, I guess, I did in solo traveling. But I've always traveled a lot. My dad is from Brazil, so when I was growing up, I was always going back and forth. I have been back there, 6 or 7 times, um, and so I got a lot of experience, I guess, with that sort of traveling. And so it didn't feel like too big of a leap, I guess, to go and travel by myself and explore a
Mm.
different country, especially where I spoke a little bit of the language. So yeah, baby steps, like starting with countries that you feel pretty comfortable with. I wouldn't say go to like Belarus the first time you're gonna go solo travel. Don't go to like Lebanon or someplace really far out there.
Yeah,
Go somewhere that's pretty close to home. Like you're in Europe, correct? You're in
yeah,
England.
yeah.
Where in England are you?
We're in London, just
Okay,
outside of
okay.
London. Yeah.
Cool, cool. Yeah. And man, I mean, I feel like everyone in Europe is just so much more comfortable with that in the first place, maybe because
I
countries are
don't know.
closer to each other.
People are okay with traveling. People are not okay with traveling by themselves because a lot of people want to experience new cultures, they want to meet new people, but the challenge that they have, and is a big problem that probably the most common problem that I get from the two, which is the questions that I've asked you today, are the questions that I get from everybody all the time, particularly boys and men, which is why I asked you these questions, because you've obviously offered some really great insight. But one of the questions that I get from people all the time is around friendships. How do I travel when none of my friends want to go on traveling? They want to go to
Hmm.
Ibiza. They want to go to places which are exactly like my home. I want to go and meet people who are different from me. I want to go to Egypt. I want to go to Asia. I want to try different cuisine. I want to listen to different music. But I don't have anybody to go with. And I'm super scared of going by myself, and it's a major problem. And um, I think a lot of men have, even like, I'm talking about adult men here. I'm talking about men who are 35, 40 years of age. They've reached a point where they don't really have friends. They have people they might go out for a pint with, but they don't have people who they can make memories with. And so
Hmm.
it's kind of like, how do you develop that? How do you find people who want to make memories with you?
Hmm.
Because a
Yeah.
huge amount of trying to, I believe anyway, a huge amount of trying to discover who you are and finding your path is that you got to be exposed to whatever it
Right.
is that you are seeking.
Hmm.
But how do you see that if you're scared of being alone,
Mm.
sort of thing?
Yeah.
And you do, and yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, it's true. It's true. I think um I emphasize the importance of solo traveling, but also acknowledging that people might find that it's going to be lonely at times. There are inevitably going to be times where, you're at the cafe in Paris by yourself eating dinner and
Mm.
it's like, oh well shit, this is kind of sad. One way or
One
another.
of the
But
most romantic places in the world, and I'm by
yeah,
myself.
exactly. If anybody's considering solo traveling, I would not recommend Paris because when I did go, I was by myself and everyone's romancing left and right, and you're like, oh, all right, what am I
Oh.
doing here? But yeah, I think it can be lonely at times, but it's still about that process of getting comfortable being by yourself,
Mhm.
forcing yourself to be in those uncomfortable positions so you can kind of break through that and get out of the comfort zone a little bit. And it is one of the drawbacks, I think, towards like a fully nomadic lifestyle. I wouldn't, if people are considering fully being a nomad, I mean, you're going to have to sacrifice some of those deeper connections in exchange for more short term kind of surface level connections. Because if you're bouncing from place to place, I mean, those people that you hang out with, they're just going to be buddies that you grab pints with. They're not going to be
Mhm.
at that deep level. You might find some very short term, strong connections that you do want to keep in touch with, and that can happen. But it's really hard to develop that and continue to nurture those relationships if you're constantly on your way to the next city and bouncing around. But yeah, it really just comes down to getting comfortable with yourself, getting comfortable being alone, and doing that self discovery.
Thank you so much. Well, there we go, guys. If that's not a great piece of advice, I don't know what is. No, thank you so much for being with us, Danny. If people want to listen to the podcast or want to get more of your content, where should they go?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm pretty heavily on Instagram and I just started a YouTube channel, but it's at the dot Danny dot Debrito dot podcast.
Okay.
So
And
anybody can find me that way.
and how
And
do you spell Debrito?
Debrito is D-E, B as in boy, R-I, T as in Tom, O.
There we go.
And we drop episodes every Monday, short, kind of 5 to 15 minute videos, whatever is on my mind and whatever I'm working on that I feel like I want to share with people. And we do have some guests on too. And Kasim is definitely going to come on, and we're gonna flip the roles here, where I'm interviewing you because I'm super curious about your life story. And I thought your first video, I mentioned this in the comment on YouTube, but your first video was like crazy how similar it was to when I first started the podcast and wanted to
Yeah.
start sharing my journey. I was like, whoa, this guy like read my mind, and we're, similar age and similar track of life. So
Yeah.
excited to keep collaborating with you, man. And
No,
thanks so
absolutely.
much for the great interview. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. So, guys, do check him out. Please go on his Instagram because there's these incredible clips and these incredible snapshots of just these quotes, which I absolutely love. So, I 100% recommend you go and check him out. All right. Thank you very much for listening, guys. And as always, continue seeking to be your highest, fullest expression of yourself